Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. Today's episode follows a very interesting topic, and it's a concept that in certain amount of my talks I've brought up. But it's the notion of how when we look outside in front of our eyes, we see the sky. And when we see the sky, it is like this edgeless space that is preserving all. And so similarly, when we look internally, that means there's two ways to look in this life. You're looking in front of your eyes or you're looking behind your eyes. When we look behind our eyes, that is the inner sky. That is the space where mind occurs, where awareness takes the shape of the elemental form. Uh, I have noticed that in order to maneuver something, in order to navigate something, and especially to be able to navigate our plane of existence, we have to increase the ability of our acknowledgement of it. When we look at history, when we look at the efficiency, the survival, the continuity of our ancestors, it was in their ability to see more dimensions to the same phenomena. So pretty much man's mind has been evolving towards a multidimensional state. We are currently in that multidimensional state. The way I have, in some sense, spoken about the moment of existence is that it has a subjective component and it has an objective component. The subjective component is that a part of you is organizing itself as a thought. And then a part of you is already the organization of the body. And when we look at our evolution, when we look at history, it was as if the unconscious movements of nature suddenly became conscious. Suddenly an organization was maintained to a point where it could acknowledge an individuality. I feel it is our individuality that was the spark of our subjective evolution. The subjective evolution, nobody is talking about it. Nobody can, in some sense, speak about it in a culture that only acknowledges objects. You see, very quickly one will find out if you are an objective being and you do not care about what is the mind or what is beyond the mind or any sort of intelligence beyond the sensory, your life is limited to the senses. You know, as if a person doesn't learn new words, he cannot say new things. Similarly, there is not the allowance for expression because the design of the inner space is not there. As I'm speaking to you right now, it's very interesting. Sometimes I'm an audience of my own talks. When I speak, I hear myself. And it's very, very fascinating because I can see how the thought arises in the conscious moment and how it, in some sense, fades. The inner reality and the external reality are two sides of the same coin. The inner reality has to do with subjective phenomena. The outer reality has to do with objective phenomena. When we look at subjective phenomena, we find that all what we are considering the world is in a moment of our attention. That's the secret I feel I tapped into, which I hadn't seen in my whole life. You know, I had heard many people tell me, pay attention, concentrate, do the right thing, all these things. But in some sense, I had never wondered if the true essence of this existential phenomena is just the presence of attention. How your attention is present will suggest your intelligence. The edge of the outer sky is inaccessible. It will forever be unknown. We will not have the technology or any sort of means to objectively explore the world. You know, scientists, it will be very hard for them to come up with a formula that explains the whole world because in some sense, we cannot get an index. We cannot get a measurement. We can't measure an infinitely changing process. Our measurements are only valid in the domain of our acknowledgement. For example, there's ways that people back in the day saw life that currently they're not seeing it anymore. In some sense, they measured, they encapsulated reality in a sort of subjective landscape, And that subjective landscape got forgotten as time went on. History is very fascinating. History is the story of candles. It's the story of candles illuminating and then melting, illuminating and then melting, illuminating and melting. And civilization has been oscillating between the efforts of individuals and the efforts of the collective. The edge of the inner sky is actually the edge of the world of sight. It is where sight suddenly has a subjective position. As a pilot of consciousness, I advise my listeners to, in some sense, recognize that there is so much unknown in this world that your knowledge will seem hollow in comparison to it. You will suddenly get this notion that, oh my God, we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere. And nowhere has become now here, even if we look at the words. Look at the letters, you know. Nowhere is now here. The here and now is nowhere. It is a state, it is a moment of no locality because there is no reference. If I ask you, look at what's meaningful in your life, you will see those meanings arise referentially. You know, as if like when you see people in a relationship, they have been with one another so many times that they have too many references of each other's character and states of mind to be ignorant of each other. Very playfully, I sometimes say my intuition is how the world is communicating to me in the moment, how the world is being communicated in the moment, how the communication of the world is even being received. And I find that the higher intelligence, the higher states of the human intelligence are rhythmic. They're dynamic states. Truth cannot be a snapshot anymore. Truth cannot be a belief. Truth cannot be an idea. Idea is a certain state of acknowledgement of reality. Eventually, the inner and outer, the moment you go within, you're going to realize what is within does not need what is outside. You're going to notice a part of your intelligence is observing itself, and a part of your intelligence is being what it is observing. And the relationship between these two modes of being is, in some sense, the animation of the human personality in the present moment. To now talk a little bit more about imaginative constructs. And by the way, any point I'm speaking, any listener, because this is a live stream, I mean, the opportunity is there. Anybody who wants me to expand further on a certain notion I've spoken about, I can free willingly do that. What we consider to be imagination is important. I'm going to read for you the dictionary definition of imagination. Okay, it comes as a noun: the faculty or action of forming new ideas or images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. So we can say our imagination is not sensory data, but it is data that is animated by the sensory. It's not sensory data, it is how sensory data moves in ways that the sensory has not acknowledged. Okay, there's another definition of it where it says the part of the mind that imagines things. Okay, now when we look at what imagine means, you know, I mean, we read it here, but I'm going to read it more discreetly. It's the part of the mind that produces images. Right now, you don't recognize, you don't only have access to the image of the world, but the image of the world can be taken by your intelligence and, in some sense, animated in various ways. That is the notion of the future. The present moment was studied to such a degree where potentials of its expression were, in some sense, uncovered. The future was something that was discovered. This is such an important idea, but many people don't acknowledge. They think there was always a future. They thought all our ancestors in our evolutionary scape, I mean, in this evolutionary landscape, how can I tell you? It's as if it took us a while to recognize, first of all, we are here. It took us billions of years to attain a sort of individual consciousness. Then it took some time to eventually develop language. And the moment we were a thought, there was a allowance for a world of thoughts to emerge. So suddenly we were no longer just eyes in the world. We were eyes that saw the world and then saw it differently within themselves. So we are, every person is a unique presence of this universal sector. Whether you think you're inefficient or efficient, whatever way you have contained the idea of you, you are part of this universal sector. And when we look at this universal sector, let me tell you, the world is not a stupid place. The world is intelligent. When the world is intelligent, how could the expressions of it not be? So eventually the person will recognize there's two ways that intelligence has functioned. It has functioned as an idea and unaware. It has functioned as an idea feeling it is external. Okay, it's an externalized idea or it's an internalized witness. The inner witness is very important in Vedanta, in all, this is something all mystical traditions around the world, all wisdom cultures in some sense preserved. They recognize it was the authentic exploration for the real self. And your real self, if it's conceptual, oh, you'll be going to places. Like somebody's going to tell you truth is in that mountain, you're going to go there. Somebody says truth is up there, you're going to go there. Like it becomes a game of location. It becomes a game of how your mind, because it has not realized it has to acknowledge itself. It is trying to acknowledge truth in others. You see, when somebody gets angry at another person, what is occurring there? The person obviously doesn't have the eyes of the person he's gotten angry at. So in some sense, he is seeing the way he has kept the other. And I'm telling you, Mr. Within is telling you, this is the uniqueness of us creatures on the surface of this planet. We are advanced communicators. We're advanced communications of the universal sector. We have a natural component and we have an unnatural component. The unnatural component occurs through, it's like the animal, it's like a thought being animalistic. It's like the animal, it's like the echo of your animal instincts in some sort of subjective, competitive mode of greed. Pretty much I'm telling you, we're not animals only, we are human beings now. We are Homo sapiens. We are conscious that we were an animal. The moment you can acknowledge a part of your life, you're actually beyond it. Okay? The moment the person can see where they are, that's when they can see where else they can be. There are many theories in the world. Some of them are stray. Some of them are observations never contained in a proper linguistic framework. Some of them are theories that lead mankind astray. If I ask you, why do you need knowledge? Most people will conclude they need it for survival. But if I tell you, why do you need survival? Why do you need the survival of knowledge? You will see it is only to preserve the dimensions of life that we have witnessed. That is the effort. I wondered, I'm like, how hilarious. The secular atheist comes to the theist and says there's no such thing as God, eternity, spirituality, the unknown, or supernatural. You know, the guy says it very confidently. You know, the secular atheist says it to the theist. And the theist is so scared that he has to just go based on a rule book. You see? But the thing I'm trying to tell you is that there is something more than your sensory perception going on here, and the only method that we've had to explore it has been the data from the senses. And the data from the senses has shifted, has moved in ways where we are like, okay, are we just our sensory perception, or is the world a linguistic simulation of an ever-present witness? What is it? Are we like in India, they think there is a state of mind that someone can attain where they think they are God. It's not that they even think, they are this attributeless collective movement of all phenomena in one space. Just like how gravity is in some sense a force that is a field. We say it's a gravitational force field, okay? And so this gravitational field, whatever comes into it has to abide by the pull of that gravitational field. Okay, so similarly, I find that our identities, our personalities as human beings is being animated by a force that is we are all in this field of intelligence. We don't recognize it. You know, it's kind of like a seed was planted, but this seed was reality. Reality was planted in a place where there was no reality. That means there came an organizational pattern. You know, I was like, okay, if we are saying we evolved, like after 4 billion years, you know, bacteria grew legs, okay. Bacteria under the water, under the depths of the ocean grew legs, okay. We find that it was as if something crystallized into its more complex expression. A seed is a simple design injected in a field of intelligence. As the field of intelligence engages with the seed, eventually, after years, there is the shadow of the tree we sit under. And I am telling you, language is the shadow of a tree in which the seed was planted in a unique way. How we became self-aware. Do you understand this? That our difference between all the other animals on this planet is that we have an awareness to self that is of a sophisticated level and accessibility that for many other entities it is not. Now, this doesn't mean we're the peak of evolution, and this doesn't mean we're on the bottom of the food chain. This means that when we classified the world, we began to see that we see a depth that other animals do not see. That means if let's say in a very playful kind of, you know, sci-fi way, in the future, animals were given technology where they could speak, they could suddenly be conscious, as if we recognize you cannot make the animal's brain different, but you can make the environment intelligent where the animal is in. Do you see? And so anyways, let's say animals could speak, and imagine we have, I remember I wrote this in my science fiction novel, The Messenger of Giants. In my novel, there's a UN in the year 5025, but it's called it has a galactic sector, okay? And so, anyways, this very sophisticated sense of the United Nations in 5025, it has for the first time a cow with advanced robotic technology attached to it, so it can speak and talk and have the sophistication of the human personality. And so this cow comes and says, we cows want reparations for all the ways that all the years human beings ate us. Do you see? And so what I'm trying to tell you is that the sophistication of how we acknowledge the world and the sophistication of how other species on this planet acknowledge the world, there is such a huge difference in it that we feel we are extraterrestrial to what has been terrestrial. We are like the aliens. We are like an alien nightmare for other animal species if they had the same way that we acknowledge reality. We would be an alien nightmare. We would be an imposition of nature's desire. You see, it's what it is that the human being has found a way to acknowledge its individualism in a grander scale. It's as if like that animal in the forest only has access to what's in its environment and its instincts, and pretty much goes and plays the game of nature it's designed for. But you suddenly see human beings, the child does not just study the environment it's in, doesn't just know its house and its room and everything. The child also goes to school and gets a history lesson and learns about various ways environments have functioned on this planet. It's like somebody saying history repeats itself, and it's kind of like history repeats itself because in some sense there are certain universal conditions that it cannot avoid. We look at the purpose of an atom, and you see the purpose of an atom is to join other atoms and become a molecule. We see the purpose of a molecule is to join other molecules. So any level of man's sophistication of his own categorization has to be, in some sense, duplicated and become something more. Okay, we are alive because there is more to see the world before the final curtain is pulled. That is why we are actors in this play of life. That is why on his deathbed, Ludwig von Ludwig von um Lud, Ludwig von Beethoven Beethoven on his deathbed. Okay, this man looked at his friends, and even though he could not hear them, he said it to them. He said, "Applaud, my friends. The comedy is over." And as a genius was leaving this earth, his friends looked at the wisdom he left behind. That means we take life so seriously, we take the story so seriously that we get caught in certain programmed ways of behavior. As we get caught into these programmed ways of behavior, our lives gets captured by them. Let me tell you, anybody who can control your attention, they can control your world. Did you know that? Wherever your attention goes, your considerations of what the world is arise from there. So it is about the preservation of attention. In other talks I've said there's a war of language going on. And some way say, Mr. Within, what do you mean there's a war of language going on? And I will tell you, it is a war of idea worship, which has led to warships. When I see nations at war, when I see violence in the street, do you know what I see? I see the inability for efficiency to have the first say. It's as if Isaac Asimov said it very brilliantly. He said, what was the exact thing he said? He said, violence is like this is not verbatim, but he said an idea like, when you see there's violence, that means nobody was smarter to solve the issue peacefully. There wasn't a smarter person there to solve the issue. And that's the problem. When you let war occur and you accept it as part of nature, you don't think you're responsible for it. Okay? That's the issue. What is not in your conscious attention, you are unconscious of. This is very common sense. What you don't know, you can't do much about, but what you know, you can do something about. And when we look at the notion of guilt, when we look at the notion of the uncontrolled aftermath of an expression, we see that guilt only arises when you knew what was the right thing and you didn't do it. You see, our minds have to acknowledge rules, because if they don't acknowledge rules, they don't exist. And so when people don't like how they exist in society, they stop caring for the rules of their environment. They stop caring for the rules of the world. Imagine right now you save the life of some person. I want you to imagine. Now, after you've saved the life of that person, you will see that person is eventually left to their free will. Sometimes I've seen this occur. Sometimes I've it's as if the person tries to pull someone out of a problem they're in, but they eventually get drawn back into it. Now, when I was younger, I was like, oh my God, that person's destined for that thing. I felt that person couldn't see any further, so his destiny was the limits of his perception. So he would go on repeating the same mistake until a new dimension of efficient perception was added to the person. Do you know many mistakes I have made in this life? Though after I made them, I realized I could have avoided it. But before I had made the mistake, I didn't even know the mistake was possible. So, guys, this is part one of the Edge of the Inner Sky. Um, there's going to be a part two short. I need to have a break. So, thanks for tuning in. Part two will probably be in 10 minutes.